would be remiss if I didn't start off by acknowledging and thanking the Fitchburg Art Museum. This is a wonderful, wonderful asset we have here in North Central Massachusetts. If you haven't been here before, I encourage you to take some time after today's program to check out the museum. But a big shout out to Nick Capasso. Is he here? Nick Capasso is the executive director of the museum. Thank you, Nick, for hosting us. And Nick and his team are doing some amazing things here at the museum. They're really helping the community and helping the region. And so again, welcome to Fitchburg, welcome to North Central Massachusetts. I'd also be remiss if I didn't acknowledge and thank Mass Inc. For their work, their incredible work they're doing around transit-oriented development. In particular, I want to acknowledge and thank Tracy for her leadership and her work putting together today's forum and the forums throughout the state that Mass Inc. has been doing. We're really honored that you approached us to partner on this program, and I want to acknowledge and thank all the other co-sponsors. It's an amazing, amazing group of co-sponsors and organizations that came together as a partnership to help put this program together and to do some incredible work in the communities here in North Central Massachusetts and outside of North Central Massachusetts as well. So thank you all. Now my role is to welcome you, and also my major role is to introduce the real person who's going to welcome you to this great city, and that's Mayor DiNatale. Steve DiNatale is the mayor of Fitchburg. I've been here about 5 years, and I think you've been mayor with a little over 4. And
Tim just asked me the same thing. 4 years.
And the mayor has done an incredible job. He's been really a great partner, and is really doing a wonderful job in a really difficult role. And so please join me in welcoming Mayor Stephen DiNatale.
Thanks, folks. We're beginning, you're coming into Fitchburg more than anything else, I think. And this second time, first time was at the Idea Lab, Fitchburg State University's event that we had maybe a couple of months ago, maybe?
Back in January,
yeah. Well, welcome again, Tracy. We really welcome you. She comes with quite a resume. Seattle? Was it Seattle prior to here, where she did some outstanding things. And you know, what we cited today, some of the partners that are here, and that's what this is about, right? It's about partnership. Certainly the Fitchburg Art Museum, Fitchburg State University, Reimagine North of Maine, Mark. These are partners that we couldn't succeed without them. Want to choose the Area Regional Transit Authority. I see Bruno in the back. I want to thank them as well. And I also want to cite a little history. Mr. Murray, Tim Murray, who was my lieutenant governor with Deval Patrick, brought a couple of bucks here to Fitchburg when he was the lieutenant governor. And I want to say publicly thank you to him. We have many bridges in this city, and one of them in particular, he was responsible for restoring. And thank you for those years, Tim, and thank you for your efforts. Let's give him a we're going to talk about today, and there are people that are much more averse to what we're doing here. But we've generated a great deal of momentum in the city of Fitchburg. Some of the folks that took the walking tour, you saw some of the things that are happening here, and we couldn't be more excited. And you're in an area that is going to be seeing a significant amount of transformative development, and we want to capitalize on that private investment and that momentum. We also need to do a better job at developing more housing in the city of Fitchburg. We're behind the curve on that. Tom Skorowski, my executive director of community development, is well aware of that. So we don't need to be convinced to develop. We want to convince this administration, although they have risen to the level that we need more of that. We need things like programs like liabilities to assets, and what that brought to this community and what it can bring to other communities. We would like to see the administration raise the market rate housing numbers that are contained in HDIP. We could use a lot more of that here in the city of Fitchburg. But that being said, I'm going to let the panelists come up here and talk about how we can do a better job in Fitchburg and how the Commonwealth can partner with us to make that happen. And again, welcome to Fitchburg, welcome to the Fitchburg Art Museum. And that's one of our focuses as a city. We are an arts and culture community, and this is the hub of that. Welcome, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Dean and Holly, for those opening remarks and all those glowing accolades. I'm trying to live up to that in this presentation. And before we kind of jump into like the broader discussion, I want to provide you with a little bit of background about our transformative TOD initiative, and make sure that this happens in the right direction. Yes. And to tell you a little bit more about our initiative, and then after me, Alexander Arkanovitz is going to come up and talk to you about the Rail Vision program that's actually happening at Mass TOT. So, whenever we talk about development and TOD, let me just kind of back up a little bit and talk about what economists call the agglomeration shadow. We know that Boston is kind of like the elephant in the state, I guess you could say. They're the big urban area where whenever economists talk about agglomeration shadow, that they tend to, their resources and their needs tend to cast a shadow over surrounding communities. But we want to kind of change that narrative a bit, and we're glad that in the governor's Future of Transportation report, he also called out the need to actually make our gateway cities more of regional hubs throughout the state. And so that's part of the reason why we're doing this work, is to make sure that the gateway cities can actually borrow size and not be solely dependent upon leveraging Boston for their growth and development. I noticed from traveling across the state that all of our gateway cities have very unique assets, and as part of our TOD initiative, we're trying to do what we can to leverage those assets to help all of our gateway cities and the surrounding communities grow. So how can we strengthen the possibilities and promise of transit-oriented development in our gateway cities? So I think some of you might be familiar with our April 2018 Transformative Transit-Oriented Development Report that actually Ben Foreman, who did not get a mention earlier on, but I have to say that I would not be doing any of this work if it wasn't for all of the great legwork that Ben and his team did prior to my coming on board at Massey back in December. They published a really informative report that took a look at 13 of 26 gateway cities because of their existing or proposed railway service. And they modeled this based upon transportation and real estate development opportunities, looking at 4 case studies, which actually include Fitchburg and Worcester. So using various data sets, they found that among the 13 gateway cities, the potential in those cities, as you see here on this first chart, is approximately 140,000 residents and 140,000 jobs that can be distributed amongst our gateway cities. So there's a lot of potential for development in these cities. So how do we achieve that? And so we're actually approaching this by looking at 2 bodies of policy, transit policy and development policy, and thinking about how we balance that in order to do comprehensive transit-oriented development. Not just real estate development, but also economic development, community development, and other types of forms of development to advance our gateway cities. So we're doing this by coordinating federal, state, and local policies to look at concentrated development around rail stations, but we also want to hear from you as to what other areas need development and how the policies that we create can broadly impact both improving rail service, improving other transit services, and improving development in our gateway cities. So we have what we call our virtuous cycle of transformative transit-oriented development benefits. This was a key finding from the report, that there are 3 areas where if these 3 areas are attended to whenever doing transit-oriented development, they kind of feed upon each other in order to improve the environmental, fiscal, and equitable growth benefits in our gateway cities. And so to start, we're going to talk about the environmental side. A lot of people tend to think that they think about greenhouse gas emissions or climate change. We're thinking about it the environmental side, but the environmental side is very broad. I only included 3 components here: the greenhouse gas emissions, pollution, which includes air, noise, water pollution, and other types of pollution, as well as sensitivity, climate sensitivity. How sensitive is your system, your city, your infrastructure to major climate events like snowstorms or floods? And so there are a couple of things that gateway cities can be doing in order to kind of help mitigate these issues. The first of which is proximity. TOD can put households closer to places where people work, play, and learn, leading to more trips using transit, which kind of help mitigate some of the environmental impacts. In addition, by creating smaller houses and more efficient housing units, shared infrastructure and shared walls can help lower heating and cooling costs, as well as help lower the emissions and negative effects from heating and cooling in your housing, as well as other built structures. Also, more activity near the transit stations. I love the fact that Fitchburg has an intermodal center, not a train station, in that you can actually engage in multiple types of transit. Their buses are all coming in there. There's also walking paths, and there's great sidewalk infrastructure. All of these different modes kind of help get people out of cars and actually making more of their local trips on foot, which then does help you to reduce your climate impact. And this also helps to actually boost ridership, where people are actually able to easily access everything all in one location. And then finally, the planned and shared management of infrastructure can help to improve a city resiliency. If it's planned properly, whenever a major climate event does happen, the city can be prepared and make sure that the built environment, as well as the transit infrastructure and other assets in the city, are prepared to meet those needs. So on the fiscal side, the report pointed out that there's a huge gap, and I think that anybody who's a developer here in the room kind of knows this, that there's a huge gap between the cost of what it takes in order to do development, not only real estate development, but also to start with businesses and also to do improvements around the city. But between the cost to do that kind of work and also the revenues that are generated from the process, whether that's through rents, taxes, or other ways to kind of capture value from investments. And so that gap in some of our gateway cities, at least the ones that were studied in the report, is up to 24%. Well, we think that up is down, down is up. So we think that by using focused mixed use and mixed income transit-oriented development, that you can create stronger, more competitive regional economies that produce job and wage growth, generating more income for our municipalities as well as for the state. In addition, municipalities can diversify revenue streams using different type of value capture and other tools, so that you actually get job, wage, and land use growth. Furthermore, you can create more housing, which continues the cycle of economic expansion and generating more revenues, once again, for the municipality and the state. And all of these things help towards reinvesting in communities throughout the city, not just in the transit-oriented development areas. So finally, on the equitable growth side, as we think about our cities and their downtowns, bringing jobs and opportunities closer to where residents live, as we talked about in the last one. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I'm trying to read and talk at the same time, which doesn't always work. So I was just trying to get it off the cuff. But one of the key things, whenever you co-locate transportation, jobs, and housing in close proximity, so that you're doing more TOD development, you're actually bringing in more skilled workers who want to be in these places because they can do more things in such a smaller space. And this urbanist movement that we're seeing right now, people moving back into the cities, it's not so much about living in a big city, but actually having access to amenities. And one of the key advantages of being a gateway city is you can actually do that on a much smaller, much more human scale. There's a much more livable environment than being in the heart of a mega city. But this also then attracts, if you have the skilled talent, you're then able to attract more businesses to come in, which then helps to, once again, feed the fiscal and environmental side by co-locating things closer to your downtown areas. But then you also improve job and housing choices for the people who already live in communities. So it's not just about bringing in people from the outside, it's about being able to improve conditions for the people who already live here. And then once you do that within the gateway cities themselves, that then expands out to the greater region, to your neighboring cities and neighboring communities. So what does the potential look like for development in our gateway cities? Ben and I have worked on this to just kind of show where all of the establishments that with 50 or more employees are located across central Massachusetts. And as you can see, there are some areas of concentration where some of the communities are directly on the rail line, some of them aren't. But whenever you start looking at not just the locations of the businesses, but also concentrations of employment, we recognize that not only along the rail lines between, for example, Fitchburg and Leominster, down the line to Littleton, Acton, and West, sorry, I can't see. So, and Westford, just want to make sure I'm saying Westford and not Westfield or Westboro. So, in Westford, we'll make sure we're also getting people out to Worcester, make sure we're getting people to Marlborough, Southborough, and Framingham, and in the reverse direction, because we have large concentrations of jobs there that people should be able to access. So as we talk about on the development side of the policy spectrum, there are a lot of opportunities that I've listed, some only just a few of them here, just want to kind of give you just a snapshot of some of the development policy opportunities that are under negotiation right now. The ones that I really want to point out are that in 2016, though, 6 years earlier, HDIP, which we talk about a lot, which is the Housing Development Incentive Program, which is designed to incentivize market rate housing in some of our communities. That program is designed to bring in more market rate because one of the things is, I think the statistic is that about 40% of all affordable housing in Massachusetts is located in our gateway cities. And if we're relying solely on our gateway cities to create affordable housing, then we start getting concentrations of low income, which makes it very hard to then diversify revenue streams for the municipality. Of course, our gateway cities need more affordable housing, but they also need more workforce housing as well as more market rate housing. And HDIP is one of those tools. And so in 2016, that law was revised, making it a little bit more accessible, but as we heard from the mayor, we do need to do a little bit more to make it more expansive so we can do more market rate housing in our communities. In addition, in 2017, the federal government initiated the Opportunity Zone legislation, which a lot of people think about that for real estate development, but there's also a huge opportunity to do economic development there. A lot of folks are still trying to figure out this legislation. I really invite folks to take a look at the toolkit that LISC is putting together, which is, I'm not going to say the entire company name, but LISC is actually putting together a toolkit to kind of help folks understand what the real estate as well as economic development opportunities are with federal Opportunity Zone legislation. As well as in January 2019, Ben once again released another fantastic report around neighborhood stabilization, and on January 30th, that became a bill that is now being currently debated in the legislature about what do we need to do to stabilize our neighborhoods, not just with large-scale developments, but also, I don't know, Ben is doing something here, but sorry.
I was just pointing out Mark, because Mark was the impetus for that.
Oh, so I'm sorry, Mark, I had no idea. So Mark, actually, Mark with New Communities was a huge part of, sounds like, of actually helping to draft that. So thank you very much, Mark. Yeah. So see right here, everything's made in Fitchburg, right? So, no, just kidding, sorry. Must have don't get mad. So I just want to say that people have been home. So I'll try not to laugh too much. Actually focuses more on addressing spotlight issues and working with smaller. I know that there are a lot of communities that have a lot of triple deckers that need a lot of upgrades. I know I live in one in Boston, and so a lot of the upgrades that need to happen with our older building stock here in the state, we really need to address. But then also in February, back on the 27th, Governor Baker called for 135,000 new housing units with the Housing Choice Bill. That's something that folks want to keep an eye on. And I also know that there's someone here in the audience from the Massachusetts Office of Business Development. Well, not too long ago, back on the 21st of March, they actually launched their vacant storefront program. A lot of our gateway cities have vacant storefront they need to have addressed, and so they're providing incentives of $10,000, up to $10,000 per business to actually locate a vacant storefront. And there are a lot of details that can actually be found. We've got some resources on our website as well as on the Office of Business Development website about that. So around transit service, the report calls for doing a few things. When looking specifically at our rail system, based upon the models that were done, we found that by increasing frequency and speed of our trains and making sure that bidirectional service was open, we could more than double the existing ridership from roughly a little over, I think it is 12,075 folks to just under 25,000 with just improving frequency and speed and bidirectionality. Of course, I say by just doing that, but it's not necessarily a very easy task. And so that's why Alexandra is going to kind of just explain that in more detail, but I just want to give you a little bit of an overview. With the Rail Vision process that's been going on, I think it's been since the summer of last year.
Yes. So
it's been about a year that they've really been going through and doing some very intense modeling of the different options and alternatives. They now have published back to the public in March 7 different alternatives, a few of which actually include 15-minute all-day service to key stations, which include Worcester, Fitchburg, Littleton, Framingham, and West Natick. Natick Center. Yes, Natick Center. So she's going to tell you a little bit more about that here when I'm done in one more slide. But we still have some work to do. I have to say that before this, I was actually over at MART taking a tour of the Intermodal Center, and I was blown away by the 6.5 million rides per year that they're offering in health and human services. Something that I just had no idea. That's 9,000 to 10,000 people per day that they're taking across the state, not just here in the Massachusetts region, but across the state to get them to their healthcare appointments. Also, they are doing some service like a shuttle that's going back and forth to Worcester, but there's more that we can do. I think if you recall some of those concentrations of jobs that are located, that we looked at in an earlier slide, there's some other interregional connections that we need to be thinking about as we think about TOD. So some of the policy opportunities that exist around transit, as I mentioned before, the Future of Transportation report, we were very excited to see that the Commission did call out specifically gateway cities as opportunities of hubs and regional development across the state. And so we're very heartened that when it comes to thinking visionarily about how we approach transit and transit-oriented development in our state, that folks are looking at the gateway cities to kind of help lead the way. But the rail vision, which, as I mentioned in March, that they released their options. I want to invite everyone to visit the website, but of course I'm not going to say too much about that because Alexander's coming up next. But also the legislature made a call, I think it was Speaker DeLeo and Senate President Spilka made a call out to the business community to kind of start providing some alternatives and some options as to what they would support in order to help kind of fund more aggressive improvements to our transit and transportation systems. And so I invite any business owners who are here in the room today to make sure that you give me your card before you leave. I will learn a little bit more about some of the businesses that are operating here in Central Massachusetts. But also, just recently, actually in April, the budget bill amendments included increase in RTA funds and funding of South Coast Rail. And I think that the increase of RTA funds is very important because we need RTA support to get those interstitial connections, I like to call them, those places that the train can't go. We need a really good mix of fixed route services with trains as well as with buses, as well as more flexible services like the health and human services and other shuttles that are provided. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to say thank you very much for letting us come to Fitchburg today and have this conversation. Please check out our website, check out our podcast. If you have any questions, I will be here. Thank you, and Alexandra, if you can come up and let us know more about Rail Vision.
Hi, thank you. There we go. Thank you for having us. We're really excited to be here. Just as we get started, can everyone raise their hand if they're a regular commuter rail rider? All right, cool. And maybe if we come back in 10 or 15 years, we have more hands up. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the long-range planning effort we're doing at the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, looking at the commuter rail system. So I'll give an overview of the project, talk about the 7 alternatives that Tracy mentioned, do a little very quick example of the operations analysis that we're just getting started, and then talk about our next steps. So the goal of, here it is. The goal of the Rail Vision process is to leverage the 388 miles of the commuter rail system that we have in the greater Boston region to better meet the needs of our economy and mobility. And so we've outlined 6 objectives, and a couple of them are very relevant for today's discussion, including supporting economic development and meeting our mobility needs, but we're also taking a look at the passenger experience, equity, and making sure that we're incorporating resiliency, both in terms of climate and fiscal. I will note, though, that the Rail Vision process is fiscally unconstrained, and so it's a really special opportunity to have a kind of cast a wide net and look at what our future needs may be for the commuter rail network, and then from there understand a plan of how we may get there. So a little bit about our process. As Tracy mentioned, we started about a year ago, and we begun by casting a very wide net of understanding what our, everyone hear me from back here? Okay. Very loud. Understanding what are all the ways in which different systems around the world operate their commuter rail, what are some of the ways in which we may think about operating it differently given the particular needs and what we understand about the region. And so we developed a very long list of different service concepts that we could employ. And then we took a kind of a process of analyzing them and talking with stakeholders to winnow down into 7 distinct service alternatives that we are currently, at that stage with the red arrow, where we're running those through a really rigorous analytical process to understand the capital investments required to deliver those alternatives, as well as the projected ridership and other benefits. We expect to have results from that process coming out in kind of late summer, fall timeframe, and the reason for our end date in the fall and into December is because we want to be able to line up the findings from Rail Vision for thinking about the next operating contract for the MBTA commuter rail. Currently it's operated by a company named Keolis, but their contract is up in 2022, and so we want to make sure that we can integrate our findings into thinking about how the next contract could be framed. So we'll release our findings to the Fiscal Management and Control Board, stakeholders, and the public in the fall for discussion about next steps and recommendation. So shifting gears a little bit, that's a little bit of an overview of our process so far, but talking about the alternatives themselves. We have these 7 service alternatives that all aim to reduce travel time, increase frequency, and improve connectivity to varying degrees and in different ways across the 14 commuter rail lines. And they do that through employing a mix of different investments and service approaches that are listed here, as well as additional ones. So this is, thinking about electrification, thinking about the span of service, and thinking about kind of details about the infrastructure, double tracking, triple tracking, et cetera. And so we have kind of a large array of different types of approaches and investments that we've integrated across the 7 service alternatives. So before I describe the alternatives themselves, I wanted to talk about 4 of the key areas of consideration that are featured in all of the 7. So the first is station typology. Tracy gave a preview of this, talking about those key stations. So we've shaped the 7 alternatives essentially, instead of kind of looking at line by line, we've shaped them around thinking about what are 3 different station types. And so the first one, which is most relevant to the discussion in this room, I think, is the key stations. And so these are areas in our outer region that are in kind of in gateway cities, in dense urban areas, or are at regional nodes. For example, Route 128, kind of where the rail system intersects with the highway system. So they're at, pardon me, they're at important points where we can kind of generate more ridership. And then in the kind of inner region, they're at key job hub locations like Back Bay or North or South Station. The second type is the inner core, and so these are largely the stations within Route 128 that are in the kind of contiguous urban area around Boston. And then the third are the outer stations, and so these are the stations in between those key stations in the outer parts of the region. So the second issue is looking at the platform level. So the commuter rail system currently has 3 different kind of types of stations in terms of access. We have stations that have high-level boarding platforms, so this is what you see at like North and South Station. We have stations where only a portion of the platform is high-level, and then we have stations where the whole station is low-level. And so when we're thinking about the different alternatives, we're looking at how we can make investments in bringing stations up to have high-level boarding platforms, in pairing that with how we're focusing frequency across the station typologies. So one of the benefits of high-level platforms is obviously the accessibility benefit, but a second benefit would be the reduced time for boarding and alighting. The third issue is electrification. Thank you. So the third issue is electrification. This is obviously a hot topic. We are considering full and partial electrification across the different alternatives, and we can talk a little bit about that and how we're looking at that later. One thing to note though is that with electrification of the system, we're also thinking about the different types of vehicles that you would employ when you're using a different type of power source, and so that's thinking about kind of multiple units. We have electric multiple units are the types of trains that are similar to what you have on the subway, so where each car is self-powered and it can actually speed up and slow down a lot quicker, so it affects travel time. And then the fourth issue is looking at different major expansion or kind of large projects that have been considered in the Commonwealth in the past few years. So the alternatives considered to varying degrees, looking at South Station expansion, Grand Junction, North-South railing is featured in one. So now getting finally to these alternatives. So we have 7 that are sort of paired up in different ways. The first alternative is basically kind of an upgrade of the current system that we have, and so it's called Optimize the Existing System. And so here we would be bringing service frequency to running every 30 minutes for all stations during the peak, and every 60 minutes to all stations during the off-peak. And so it's certainly an upgrade to the frequencies that we have now, but it's kind of our base level. The second 2 are focusing on regional rail. So these are those ones that are focusing on 15-minute service all day to all those key stations. So for the Fitchburg line, as Tracy mentioned, that'd be Fitchburg, Littleton, Waltham, and then North Station. And for the Worcester line, that'd be Worcester, Framingham, Natick Center, Yawkey-on-Inn. And so then 4 and 5, and so this would be kind of the diesel and electrified version of that key station focus. Alternatives 4 and 5 then flip the focus of increased frequency. So all the kind of stations in the outer part of the region would have that alternate 1 frequency of 3060, so it's still an improvement. But then the 15-minute all-day service will be tested in the inner core stations. And so that's the stations largely kind of within the Route 128. Alternative 6 is the all-in, where we're trying to kind of do both, serve every 15 minutes to all the key stations as well as the inner core stations, and every 15 minutes during the peak and 30 minutes during the off-peak to the outer core stations. And then alternative 7 is where we're doing a slightly different treatment on each line. So it's dependent on what the findings were from the first phase of the analysis. This chart is just useful for looking at how these alternatives compare across the 4 key areas that we discussed. There's the station typology, which we use to describe the frequency. There's the accessibility, electrification. So you can see those electric versions of urban rail and regional rail are full system or partial system electrification. And then the major expansions included, which in this case mostly I think the most relevant one would be Grand Junction is featured in a few of them. And that's a connection that would be made between a future West Station and North Station and act like a shuttle service. I'll just really briefly dive into an example of how we're understanding kind of, if we lay out these are the frequencies we're aiming for, what are the capital investments that are actually required to get there. And so this is something that we presented to the Fiscal Management and Control Board last 2 weeks ago. And so this is for alternative 1. So that's just bringing it to the 30-minute service during the peak and 60-minute service during the off-peak. We can see, I'm not sure if you can read it, but essentially the maps demonstrate that The investments required would mostly be upgrading platforms to extend them and adding some track capacity at certain stations, as well as adding turning tracks at some stations so that trains could turn around more easily. So this was south side. Worcester line is running east to west, and then here's the north side. Fitchburg parallels Worcester. So in terms of our next steps, we're going to be continuing to understand what the capital investments required for each of the alternatives are, and the way we do that is using Rail Traffic Controller, which is a simulation tool where you can basically simulate how the rail is operating and understand where there are delays or issues, and that's where you would kind of model in adding tracks or platforms, et cetera, other pieces of infrastructure. We are also going to be working with CTPS to identify the projected ridership associated with each alternative. We are going to be using a new and special tool called the Regional Dynamic Model that will help us understand what are the land use impacts associated with these different alternatives. So if you're running service every 15 minutes to different areas, what's the land use potential associated with that? This is the first time we're using this tool, so it'll be really interesting to see kind of how that works. No promises. And then, obviously developing the cost estimates. We don't have those yet. Those were not included in the handy maps we just saw. And then sharing our results with the public and the advisory committee and our fiscal management and control board. These are just some of, we saw the capital investments results, but, as I mentioned, we'll also be getting ridership costs, emissions benefits, et cetera, just sort of laid out in the different types of metrics we'll be using. So feel free to visit our website for more information or ask any questions after the panel has concluded. Thank you.
Hello again. So my role as moderator is to really keep us on track. I'm told we have about 25 minutes for this next portion. We'll hear from some of the panelists about transit-oriented development. So I'm going to put my timer on here for 25 minutes to make sure that I don't fail in my role. And then after the 25 minutes, we're going to open it up to Q&A from all of you in the audience. So let's get right into it. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to take about 2 minutes, just introduce themselves, their name, organization, and tell us a little bit about their role in transit-oriented development in their communities or region. So, you want to start, Tim?
Sure. First, I just want to say thank you to the opportunity to be here at Massing for all the work that they've done in promoting our gateway cities. I'm the president and CEO of the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce. I'll be 6 years next month. But my work around transit-oriented development really started as a city councilor in Worcester, continued as mayor and as lieutenant governor. So I look forward to this discussion because smart transit decisions are inextricably linked to economic development, housing policy, and you could even argue educational policy. So it is, I think, one of the key elements that has to be tended to, and look forward to the discussion to talk about examples of where that's been done and the activity that it's creating. Ground zero for my work in this regard over the years in different roles has been Worcester and Union Station, but certainly as Lieutenant Governor, worked closely with leaders in the public and private sector, educational leaders, to focus on transportation, and some work in Fitchburg, which we're seeing. Well, it takes, like anywhere, it takes time. I was saying to the mayor and to Roy just momentarily that before we started, we live in a society where we go to our phone and we get it, it's coming to the door, something's delivered, we get an answer, we get in touch with somebody immediately. But development sometimes takes time. It takes a level of patience. And without a doubt, coming to Fitchburg today, having a chance to tour and seeing what was here 15 years ago, there's enormous credit to a lot of people. And I just want to say before I hand the mic that the elements here in Fitchburg, I think, are very important. You've got one of the most well-respected chamber leaders in the state, Roy. you've got a mayor, and I laughed when he said he was the mayor for only 4 years, because I can tell you, when he was a state representative, he acted like the mayor of the state house. I saw him more at my door, you know, hey, Murray, you gotta help us with this, you gotta help us, you gotta get to the governor, you gotta get to this cabinet secretary. Marty Jones in mass development, I mean, he was tenacious. And don't kid yourself, you absolutely need that element. You had a college president in Bobby Antonucci, one of the most talented, smartest guys and people I've ever met. And so you had, and President Lapidus, I think, has continued that. The arts and cultural community stuff, I think all the ingredients are here in Fitchburg. We're seeing that momentum generate, and the fact that we've got this turnout and level of interest, I think, is a great sign.
Good afternoon, my name is Tricia Pistone. I'm the Vice President of the Montechusett Opportunity Council. Happy to be here today and certainly on this distinguished panel. I think one of the reasons why I was asked to be here certainly is my background. Many of you may have known me when I worked for Congressman John Olver, and I was his Economic Development Director. And in that role and in his role on the Transportation and HUD Appropriations Committee during a time of great earmark opportunities, we worked very closely with Bo and many other people in this room to really leverage some federal dollars into this region, which, even though it exceeded my time at the Congressman's office, the commuter rail improvements, the layovers facility, the Wachusett Station, the intermodal facilities here in Fitchburg, but as well as Leominster and Gardner, really looking at a regional approach to transportation. In the last, now more than 10 years, I've been at the Montechusett Opportunity Council, but in the last 4 or 5, really proud of the work that we've been doing in Fitchburg as one of the round 1 working cities, communities, working on a Reimagine North Main initiative, really focused not just on the downtown economic core, but also how we could really leverage the neighborhood market in housing adjacent to our downtown. And then lastly, I have, actually I want to give a shout out to Representative Higgins, who is here, and my colleague Andrea Freeman. There's also a lot of work being done around, and throughout the state, around sort of connecting the health equity and social equity in our gateway communities, and looking at how we can really leverage active living and access to healthy eating options, and how we can do that around transit-oriented development in a very smart way is also some of the work that we're doing. We're talking on the tour that this region has a 4.5-mile rail trail that actually was also an earmark that's still kicking around today, connecting Fitchburg and Leominster with the commuter rail station. So really looking to leverage those opportunities.
Thanks. I'm Paul Matthews. I'm with the 495 Metro West Partnership. We're a public-private regional advocacy group that serves 35 communities along the 495 corridor. So we represent, in terms of regional payroll, $24 billion in regional payroll that sits with serving residents both to our east and our west. One of the top origin points for our workers is Worcester, via the Worcester line, via driving, via transit. One of the top, the third origin point is Boston, and that's reversed. One of our top destinations is Boston for workers. Our third destination is Worcester. So you can see the interrelationship here where transit plays a critical role connecting people. We have 3 commuter rail lines in our region, one of which is Fitchburg, and I'm proud that we spent a lot of time working on the Fitchburg line. I had a colleague who's now did such a great job in the Fitchburg line working group. She now works for Mass Development. So way to go, coaching on my one coworker. However, in terms of the interrelationship, what we see are the employment centers in our area are feeding growth in gateway cities like Fitchburg, Worcester, and others, but also our residents are going to work in turn in those gateway cities. So it's not the same radial and spoke service that was needed 30 years ago. And I applaud Alexandra and the Rail Vision team for thinking broadly and strategically. I'm fortunate to sit on that group with Ben, with Tim, and with many others, and we're looking forward to the outcome. But I think one of the things we're seeing is communities like Framingham, which are not a gateway city, but I appreciate Tracy spent a great day with us the other day there. We enjoyed great Vietnamese food. support our RTA, one of the state's newest. And one of my first acts 15 years ago was helping found that RTA. And what we're seeing is transit linkages on housing, yes, are growing up around MBTA commuter rail, particularly in Framingham, which adopted innovative zoning. But we are also seeing it around our regional transit authority. I know Mo Khan's here. Andrea is doing a fantastic job organizing statewide support for RTAs. And I know the legislature, particularly the Senate, is working on that as we speak. I can't state enough the importance that RTAs play in this conversation and how they're leveraging private sector development and housing. And when we look at the commuter rail system, making those first last mile linkages is going to be a critical component. So, proud to be on the panel. Thank you for having me.
Hi everybody, I'm Mark Doug from New York Communities. I feel like this is my second home because we do so much work with the Fitchburg Art Museum. So we're a community development corporation. We're about creating great neighborhoods where people choose to live, work, and invest. And I have something that other folks don't have, which is you're walked right across from one of the projects that we're working on. So we want to put in 62 units of mixed income artist preference housing right across the street from the Fitchburg Art Museum. And one of the things about New York Communities is that we were doing transit-oriented development sort of before we knew that it was transit-oriented development, because people like great neighborhoods, and one of the things about great neighborhoods is people like to be able to walk in those neighborhoods, and they need to be able to walk to things, get to downtown. So a lot of our work has been in small, compact areas. We haven't really done any of these big green fields. We've really been picking up these inner city lots, redeveloping them, and turning them into, oftentimes converting them, repurposing them back into housing, or taking them from housing and rehabilitating them. In addition to doing some housing work, we also help small businesses, we help homeowners purchase their first home, and we do a lot of community organizing too, so that we're listening to what residents want to say in their neighborhoods. And I guess the last thing I want to say about all this is that, two things. One, we're starting a new program called Liabilities to Assets, and the idea is to take vacant homes in 5 different communities, Athol, Clinton, Gardner, Fitchburg, and Leominster, take those vacant homes, rehabilitate them, put them back in the market so that people can move back into these neighborhoods. And the idea is that these homes are in dense clusters so that when you fix one home up, you're not only fixing that home up, you're fixing up a whole neighborhood. And last, I want to talk about the importance of vision. It was great, Alexander, to see that vision about what those rails are, because as a practitioner, we're relying on the great ideas from folks like Mass Inc., the vision of what the rail system can be, the vision of our mayors, Mayor Di Natale, and also Mayor Mazzarella and Leominster, about what their cities can be, so we can figure out what our role is. And oftentimes, we're not able to, we don't necessarily have that vision, but we can then connect our local vision with these broader visions that folks have. And I think that's one of the things that make great neighborhoods and make it so that people really want to live there.
Let's talk about success stories. I'll ask the panelists, can you speak to any success stories in your communities around transit-oriented development, and tell us a little bit about the impact it's had in the community in attracting private development, as well as helping with housing and other issues in the community. Who wants to take the first one?
Well, I think, there's a lot of talk about the Red Sox and Worcester. The success of Union Station, starting with 6 commuter rail trains, now to 20, with express service and non-stop heart-to-hub included in that. As that has increased exponentially, the amount of investment in concentric circles around Union Station has accelerated. And rehabilitation of buildings for commercial uses, housing uses, the Edge, which is the old Osgood Bradley building. I could just go on and on. The whole City Square project, 145 Front Street, with market rate upscale housing in an area that had been one of our poorest in the census district in terms of, so it's creating that mixed use. And as Tracy pointed out earlier, we need to continue to be attentive to affordable and workforce housing, and our chamber is leading a housing study that we're going to roll out in October at our Game Changers conference. But it's the Union Station and the Red Sox And Larry McKino came in July of 2017 with his whole team. And the city manager and I walked out of the restaurant that our teams had been meeting at for 2 hours. We walked up to Union Station, which was 2 blocks from block 50. And he said, wow, I've never been in this building, it's so beautiful. And then the other two blocks down, Janet Ray Smith, the famous ballpark architecture and planner, went the other way with the mayor, and they realized just how close where the potential ballpark that we were talking about is to Union Station. And so I could tell that story. And again, the improvements here in Fitchburg have led to some of that development. We work with New Balance, Representative Mike Moran, and Alston Brighton to bring New Balance spent some of the money, state put in money to create Alston Landing, or Boston Landing as it's called. Within 10 years, you've got the Red Sox, the Celtics, the Bruins, housing, office space going up in that area. Brockton, similar type of thing around the, so when you make smart strategic investments in transportation, private sector economic development follows.
I would just add, today, for many of you who are walking around Fitchburg, the first, I would call, transit-oriented development project is hoping to receive LIHTC funds this year. This spring, fingers crossed, $20 million, 44 units, right next to the intermodal center. So I think that's a sign of more to come in Fitchburg, but I completely agree with Tim. I was going to just comment that I don't think we'd be talking about transit-oriented development. I don't think that MassLink incorporated Fitchburg in that report, if I didn't beat that up at the State House, in addition to the fact that to include us, as well as the fact that there has been hundreds of millions of dollars invested in the Fitchburg commuter line. The fact that we have a layover facility in Westminster to allowing for the earlier trains, the more active schedule that we have today, positions ourselves to be able to have these conversations about development opportunities.
Thank you, and as a Worcester resident, I'm excited about the new stadium deal Tim's talking about. But in terms of other scale models for communities, I think Framingham is a phenomenal example. And again, fortunately it works that I just brought Tracy there. The Vietnamese restaurant we ate in, very next door, was the site of one of the first foundational TOD projects in downtown Framingham. It was the first one done in decades. The city did invest via tax incentive $6 million, but it's a $60 million project. It's 200 units and almost 3,000 square feet of retail, right in the middle of downtown, and you can literally see the train tracks that are blocked by. So that was a game changer in terms of demonstrating to other developers that it was worth their time and their money. That was an Atlanta Development Corporation that made that decision, and now of those 200, 700 housing units have followed with various developments in downtown Framingham. And it's due to start leasing next month. And who's interested, I'm sure I can refer you. And the APA gave a planning award last year, so we're very proud about the project.
So one of the first projects we did was made it just within that quarter mile. We took an old bank building. We actually used new market credits to do that. And you can see, again, thanks to the vision of our mayors, that as people start investing, you see other private developers starting to do that. So in Leominster, you saw banks choosing to reinvest right in their downtown. Here too, we see banks that are staying put where they are so they can take advantage of the new opportunities that are coming as our working cities challenges, these projects come along right across from Old City Hall, from the new City Hall, the former City Hall that the mayor is now renovating. So I think these things tend to build on each other, and continuing to invest in the downtown, I think, is a critical way to take advantage of that transit infrastructure that we already have in place.
So we heard Tracy talk earlier about some of the different economic development tools that exist, state and federal tools that exist to help with transit-oriented development. And so can you tell us about those tools that you think have been most helpful with transit-oriented development, and What else would you like to see? What would you like to see the state or federal government do? What new tools to help encourage more of this kind of development?
Well, I mentioned the former Osgood Bradley building, the Edge, student purposed housing next to Union Station. That would not have happened if it wasn't for HDIP. And the mayor is absolutely right. Tracy referenced it. We need to increase the impact of HDIP if we're going to accelerate that development. We were one of the beneficiaries. Then Representative Di Natale was part of the legislature in 2006. The Economic Development Bill increased by $25 million, I think, the annual allocation for historic tax credits. It's time to, I think, have that conversation again. And certainly many of the low-income programs help facilitate mixed-use projects. Federal level, we don't know what's going to happen, but I think Tricia, what you talked about, Congressman Olver, I'll never forget, and one of the things I hope they do bring back are earmarks. I do, because if it wasn't for Congressman Olver and the earmarks that he was so attentive into securing, a lot of the things relating to rail and development in the Fitchburg area wouldn't have happened because it would have been, a lot of the state money falls with his federal match. And he was able to unlock so much, and I'll never forget, I just got elected lieutenant governor, and I got a request from Jim McGovern, Congressman Oliver wants to see you. So I didn't have an office, I met him in where my law office was, and he showed up on a Saturday morning, and cerebral, professorial, he came in with this folder, and he was so fired up and animated, we got this, Marcus, you gotta do this, we gotta do this, and boom, boom, boom. And he had the whole kind of plan, and you need to help get this. He was unbelievable, and I just had a whole different idea and perception of him in terms of his passion for this and engagement, but that matters too. And so I'm hopeful, Roy, to get your question at the federal level, that there's some type of meaningful transportation infrastructure, and earmarks are a part of it.
Thank you for that shout out for John Oliver. I remember being in his car while he mapped out what a Wachusett station could actually look like. I think, again, trying to sort of represent our region up here, I know our communities have really taken seriously the opportunity zones. Fitchburg, Leominster, and Gardner all have multiple census tracts identified. Fitchburg and Leominster both have HDIP zones. I guess it's still, at least the jury's still out with the opportunity zones of whether it's going to benefit communities where the market isn't working as well, where we may not have projects as large scale as you're seeing more in the metro or in Boston, but we're certainly putting those packages together. Certainly, looking at transit-related dollars, but we have leveraged our Mass Works funding out here, Beach Streets funding, seeing more opportunities in those areas. But I also think, my bully pulpit a lot of the time when we talk about state funding is, there's a lot of demands on local communities to work collaboratively within the region, within each other. The same needs to be said at a state level, I think, in terms of getting MassDOT to be working more closely with the business offices, the housing departments, even DPH around equitable investments, and then how we can really be leveraging these state fundings to be more targeted, and again, in a more equitable way.
I think on a similar note, I would argue in Framingham, at the time it was the town manager and town development staff were very prescient at getting some state funding to leverage a lot of activity. They convened roundtables with developers and brought in the planning board and town meeting members. And believe it or not, a lot of those meetings were spent locked in debate over parking ratios. The number of planning board members and town meeting members adamantly opposed to the idea of reducing parking for housing was critical, and it had to be overcome. So there was a lot of zoning and permitting issues that state funding helped them overcome with planning and technical resources that freed up some technical resources outside municipal government, like RPA technical assistance, that helped them get the zoning changes done that in turn leveraged the housing developments. It's very difficult for municipalities on such constrained budgets to find ways to do that without external support. So the MassWorks funding program, the state's housing choice program, and other technical assistance grants, I think are critical in addition to the housing and urban center TIFs program that we discussed.
So we've used many of these different programs. We've used new market tax credits, historic tax credits, brownfield receivership, 40B, 40R. I agree, a lot of it comes back to parking and getting people to be able to agree about that. I think it's one of the great reasons why both 40R is such a good tool and why I hope the state legislature passes the housing choice bill, because it's really hard to deal with this 2/3 issue. You know, if you have 5 people on a board, it means you gotta get 4 of them. And that makes it much harder, which in turn, then oftentimes, particularly in communities that are not, that have some issues, it in turn it takes control away from the city because developers then come out and use 40B to be able to get development in a place that the city or town doesn't necessarily want it. The other area where I really hope the state could improve would be on the historic tax credits. For those of you who walk through downtown Fitchburg today, but it's the same in every single one of these communities. You have a lot of old downtown buildings, and our program does not work the way that it should work. It's a years-long process to get through it. It's not coordinated with other resources, and so no other entity will provide you with the funding that you need to be able to go forward until you have all the state historic tax credits lined up. There's such a need, they can be used so well. We really need a better way to prioritize those systems. I feel like a broken record because I know I've brought it up a million times before, but that would be a really great thing to be able to do. At the federal level, it would be great, I think, particularly for this sort of thing, to be able to fix the new market tax credit program, free up a little bit more of those dollars, and make them not quite so competitive now, because it's sort of a double round. You have to find your allocatee, Mass Development or MNIC, whoever it is you're using, and then you have to compete to be able to get the resources from them, which makes it just that much harder to plan or to do anything else at all. So if there were a few more of those types of things, I think that could make a big difference. And I'll be honest, I don't quite know how to match the opportunities zone with these other programs that we need. And in our area, we sort of need more of a boost to be able to make these projects become feasible and take advantage of the transit that we have already. So, there you go.
So I think we're going to pause here for a second with questions from me. I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. I'll come over with a microphone for any of our panelists, for all of them.
Thank you. My question is about tourism, and that may seem a little odd because we've been talking about housing or employment along transit. But thinking of Tim Murray speaking about the Woostocks, or what it'll end up being called, or here in Fitchburg, we're in a cultural facility that people come to for a day trip, often on the weekends, or in West Fitchburg, we have Great Wolf Lodge, soon we'll have Game On Fitchburg, a tournament play facility. So I wondered if the panelists can speak about transformative TOD, but thinking of tourism as sort of the twist, and any comments on that?
Who wants to take it?
I was going to say, boy, you're also allowed to answer some of these questions. As the tourist expert in our region.
Yeah, we'll just keep passing the one microphone. So I'm the clerk of the Metro West Tourism and Visitors Bureau, and that's a really interesting point to bring up, because thinking more broadly, and again, not to call out Tim's former role, but in the prior administration, they created a creative economy initiative that really helped leverage a lot of linkages between tourism, economic development, and the creative and cultural institutions like the museum we're in right now. I do think that a lot of tourism bureaus see that potential, that marriage, and are actualizing it. I think the idea of linking it to transit is a really good idea, and it's one that's not always thought of. I do think you'll find that a lot of the RTA administrators are eager to find destinations their riders want and try to make it work. So I urge you to make that linkage with RTAs and try to think that as a potential opportunity.
I would say in our region, we had probably one of the first examples of that with the Wachusett Mountain, with the reverse commute. When did that start, Mo?
Late on 80s, actually.
Late 80s. We were thinking about linking people from Boston with their skis and advertising that way to come out to this region. So that's not new to us. I think it's how do we perfect it, and also that missing mile from the hub of the transit center to get out to access the great assets that we have, both recreational as well as cultural.
I think as Paul mentioned, you know, at the state level, the whole Creative Economy Initiative was about how to facilitate, put some dollars in. I think we did a couple significant bonds for the cultural facilities fund as well. But I just go back to Worcester. One of the most important things we did when I was on the council at the time, the chief development officer, he wasn't there very long in Worcester, but he did have we created the Cultural Coalition. Challenged all the arts and cultural organizations to put a little money in the pot collectively. Some, that might have been $100, for others it might have been, you know, 10, 30, 40,000. The city matched that in terms of creating a position, doing all the administrative work, and that person's charge was to facilitate, coordinate, promote. And that, a lot of it was in a very walkable radius, and where people could walk and have experiences, or within close proximity to trains and RTA, and that's housing. So I think a lot of economic development is people, as it relates to travel and tourism, want something authentic, unique, a set of experiences, and I would argue that a lot of Worcester's restaurant scene is spawned off of that creative energy that's tied together, and I just think it's a recipe that our gateway cities can, many of them use successfully and can continue to because there's that, you can't create the architecture and authentic, that experience. And so when you add in a show or a play or a gallery, like we've got here, it's unique.
Next question?
I like it there.
Boy, you make me wait. Yeah. Sorry, did I bump something back there? Sorry. I'm not going to be long. I'm not going to be long. We have the, Tim and Trish, we have the formula, Mark, we have the formula, you know, with the fact that we've got rail line right here in Fitchburg, an intermodal facility. And you know, the old, if you build it, they will come, but we need help with the housing piece of it. Because I believe if we can capitalize on that, the affordability of living here in Fitchburg, we want that reverse commute. We want people coming to Fitchburg from outside where their income is gone on housing, apartments and leases. You can get affordable housing here. You can get a lot of house for what you're paying in Somerville. No offense to Somerville, but this is a lot more affordable with the amenities that we've got. Places like Fitchburg Art Museum. You know, we've got outstanding parks. Our schools do an outstanding job as well. We want people coming out here. And one of the challenges I've had with MBTA and Keolis, and we've started discussions with it, how do you help me market Fitchburg? Though you're on those trains going back and forth, we want some kind of marketing effort that says, you could be living here and this is what you're going to get for your buck. This is where you should be. Live, work, and play. Thank you.
So great question. If I can summarize, we have a real housing issue in this state, and how can transit-oriented development help with that? And you're our housing expert. You want to start?
I mean, I think Mary, that's taking advantage of the resources that we have, right? We can't be something that we're not. And our area has, the market rate housing is affordable. And I think that part of what you're already doing with your administration is changing the zoning to make it easier to attract developers to be able to come out here. And I think then We need also a few other, on the housing side, as I mentioned, the state historic tax credit program is great. We just need to tweak it a little bit, improve it a little bit, because it can be a lot less expensive to build the housing here than right downtown.
about the project next door?
So right next door, we're putting in 62 units of, even our market rate housing is going to be affordable. It's going to be artist preference to take advantage of the museum that's right here. It will have, it'll also have some artist amenities. So we've been working with a whole group of folks here to make sure that we're building it so that artists will come. And it's also designed for people who are here locally too. So that if you don't have to be just a professional artist to live here, but somebody who is a cultural, who is doing this on the side while we have another job. And that's one of the things that works really well, is that artists aren't wealthy, but they are creative. And we want to be able to take advantage of the diversity that we have, the great culture that we already have in Fitchburg, to create a cultural community right here, to create a community of folks that want to live in this neighborhood, that really want to take advantage of the resources that we have. And that's why we've been so lucky to have a great partner like the Fitchburg Art Museum, because that is, again, taking advantage of the things that we already have and not trying to be something that we're not. We already have that here. We have the rail line. And we think that's why the project will be successful.
One other piece of advice I have is some of the communities we work with have invested in branding campaigns, right? It doesn't necessarily, I'm not talking Wall Street Journal ads or anything, but the idea of having a staff position charged with coming up with good news and telling it on multiple channels, whether it be social media, whether it be an electronic newsletter, convening bus tours, convening, getting developers to sit down one-on-one or in groups, and using partners like the Chambers of Commerce and the other various entities out there, like the Tourism Bureau, are all really important. It's like Tim said about patience and watching it pay dividends down the road. Unfortunately, government's not always well geared for patient investment over a long period of time, but that seems to be where we see the most success.
Good advice. Thank you. Yeah.
I would just add, first of all, just a shout out to Mass Development and the TDI initiative, which I know both Worcester and Fitchburg is part of, and certainly I know we're looking at branding and marketing as part of that, so that's on our radar. I also sort of challenge that it's not just a housing issue, it's also a transit cost issue. Just looking at the cost of an annual subscription on MBTA for Zone 8 is $4,200 a year. That's $350 a month. You can get a pretty nice used car for $350 a month. So how do we incentivize people to live in Fitchburg, take the train, and I would say also looking at interzone working opportunities, not just going to Boston. But we're hearing, threats of, commuter rail, the cost with MBTA, we're going to put it back on the commuters. How do you incentivize that? So we also need, this is a policy issue of how do we repair a transit system and have a state-of-the-art transit system, not on the backs of commuters, looking at, the ride sharing costs, the ride hailing taxes, as a way to offset transit costs. I think is really important.
I agree with a lot of what Paul had to say, having worked at City Hall and now at the Chamber. And I heard the mayor yell, and I don't think you all heard it, but when Paul said, "And you're going to be patient," the mayor said, "I'm not patient." No. but patient, but persistent. So I think it is talking to MBTA, talking to every group and organization, banging the door, using social media, trying to develop earned media, opportunities with the Greater Boston media. It's, Fitchburg say it's really just every mechanism you can to try to kind of tell that story and take advantage of opportunities that are here right now. One, just a little anecdote. Yes, the Red Sox it's a great story, and we're out regularly trying to recruit companies to Central Mass, and a lot of fanfare, attention, and wish the Chamber, in conjunction with the city, put in a bid on the Amazon piece, and we did that early. And that planning exercise was a good one among the teams, and a lot of that data that we were able to put together that we've used in multiple other presentations. But the other thing that I'm seeing now, and this is where the Greater Boston area, you mentioned Somerville, as people kind of age in their career, the commute gets old. And we have had probably half a dozen small tech companies and engineering kind of design companies open up offices in Worcester, like outposts. So they might have 50 or 60 of their employees in Boston or Cambridge, but now they've got an office in Worcester that's 12, 15 with plans of growth, for somebody who's in that 128, 495 corridor saying, at this point in their life, I'm not spending 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night. I can go to my son or daughter's game, it's faster commute into Worcester. But that goes for all of Central Mass. And I think that's where there's an opportunity where some of those small companies offering that alternative. And a lot of companies now want some, for a variety of different reasons, some redundancy. They don't want to be all in one location, you know. So I think thinking long-term in that regard and how North Central area can kind of get in that space, given the rail line.
Thanks for your patience.
Persistence. I was wondering if the panel could speak a bit to the means that are in place to leverage design in terms of the full ambitions of realizing TOD, particularly outside of the major metropolitan regions. So when we're talking about gateway cities, how do we sort of produce the kind of quality of spaces and buildings and things around these transit centers?
So the example I offered earlier of the Alta Union House, right, in Framingham, it won an APA planning award last year for its design. It includes parking and a substantial amount of residential development right in downtown. Yet there's always opportunities for improvement. And I would point out, one of the things that was commented to me by my local RTA is, gee, it would have been super had someone talk to us about where we could park the bus to pick people up at the actual project, versus now they're asking us, can you bring a bus by? Well, you're right up to the sidewalk. We're going to double park in block traffic. So there's always opportunities for improvement. I would point out that frequently in a lot of our communities, right, zoning hasn't changed in decades, yet if you look in the last few years, the amount of our communities actively looking at downtown zoning and incentives and being innovative has taken off. And it's not just here in North Central or in the region I serve, it's all across the state. And I do applaud municipal governments for taking the difficult steps. It's not easy to have a conversation where you're telling your own residents, we're going to change parking rules and it's going to work. But we need to have bodies downtown. But I see it as a Worcester resident, I see it in the communities I work in, and I see it here, happening on all these scales. And municipal governments, I think, are admirably doing the difficult task of thinking about design and zoning.
I'll just say for Fitchburg, one good example is the 40R district. So as a developer, you get something, it's much easier to get your project permitted, but there are also design guidelines that are built in there to make sure that it's consistent. And Fitchburg did a great job with their 40R of making sure that that design was consistent with the image that they wanted.
We have time for one more question? Oh, got 3 hands up. 4 hands up. All right, I'm done.
Okay. Quick comment, Mr. Mayor. Talking about selling lines. Look at the Downeaster. What the Downeaster has done for Saco and Essex and all those stops. You can't go anywhere in Maine and not see advertisements for the Downeaster and what you could do for beer fest, things like that, all year round. So that's a good example for what they're trying to talk about. So actually, my question to the panel, some of the glory days of earmarks, and we might not see those again from the federal level. So the association I work for, we're a national rail passenger advocacy group based on DC. But with the FAST Acts, the Service Reauthorization Bill coming up for reauthorization next year. One of the things that we're talking about is actually finding ways to use rail restoration and infrastructure kind of funding grants to help balance, they actually have TOD written into law for at a federal level. So how can mechanisms like that help some of the instances here on a regional level, actually without actually bringing back earmarks?
I think I saw a chart last week that Worcester County might be second or third in the state in terms of jobs related to freight. And, those are important jobs in terms of manufacturing, people who might, English might not be the primary language as they connect. Freight drives a lot of jobs, and rail is a much more efficient way, cost effectively and in an environmentally friendly way. So I've always been the mind that we need to be investing more in our rail infrastructure, recognizing there's a balance between commuter rail needs and the freight rail. And the good news is, the north part of Worcester County, there are a number of rail points and rail companies that service the area. So I just think it's a smart investment on lots of different fronts, and would encourage people to pay attention to that, because we create modern rail infrastructure, rail spurs, companies, you have something to market and to sell to companies as they look to grow in a dense area, but a very attractive area of New England.
I think my only comment that I would add to that, I know Gardner, for example, commuter rail doesn't extend out there, freight rail does. We did a lot of studying back 10, 20 years ago, looking at how we could invest in that line, and it just wasn't financially feasible. However, we worked with the Transit Authority to purchase a building, which is now the bus transit station in Gardner, right adjacent to that freight rail, thinking that down the road, light rail, some other innovation around rail could help Gardner. So I think it's also not just thinking where commuter rail exists now. Tracy, with having her peer here with Tim, it's been the Fitchburg line versus the Worcester line, a lot of these conversations in Boston about where we're investing the transit dollars. When you talk about how do we better connect Worcester and Fitchburg, that's exciting. And so how do we plan for the future? The question before was around, parking, and it makes me think, and I was just commenting on like Robin Chase, the heaven or hell around autonomous vehicles. How do we plan parking for the future around autonomous vehicles and try to make that state today when folks are looking for parking spaces? So again, planning for the future and telling that story, I think, is great. So congratulations on the work you're doing.
And I want to echo that and say thank you for the work you're doing. I also want to echo, while earmarks are tremendously useful, and I absolutely agree we need them back. I was able to secure a few in the past, and they've had immeasurable effects. I would point out, if you look at what happened with the Worcester line, right, from 94 on, with expansion beyond Framingham to Worcester, and you look at what happened here in the Fitchburg line, a lot of investment was made not necessarily about earmarks. Like the Fitchburg line, a lot's been said about Congressman Olver, but he secured New Start's funding that really was pivotal. And that's less about an earmark, and that's more about leveraging an ongoing program and positioning us to benefit from it. I'm hopeful that the reauthorization is going to allow opportunities like that to be leveraged. And another piece, just to offer sort of an FYI commercial for a moment, myself and MAPC and Transportation for Massachusetts have been spending for the last year some time setting up a commuter rail communities coalition, which is intended to bring together municipal leadership, mayors, town administrators from around the state to get to the point. It's not about Fitchburg versus Framingham versus Franklin. It's about bringing the lines together to advocate collectively. Now, part of that might be on the commuter rail vision effort, part of it could be on the next commuter rail operating contract, part of it could be on the capital investment plan, which just came out today, and part of it should be advocating and working with the state to benefit from what happens on the federal level. So, I'm hopeful there's a lot going on to bring people together to benefit from these different pieces and ensure that there's a voice at the table from areas like Fitchburg, Framingham, and Franklin.
And I just want to philosophically just mention the earmark piece. I mean, New Starts, the Tiger grants, those are all wonderful. But it's a philosophical point for me as to why I think earmarks are important. It's about accountability. People elect their elected officials. They don't elect bureaucrats, Mass DOT building, who probably all primarily live in the greater Boston, who probably all live in the greater Boston area, right? Right? They think they understand, they call it Fitchburg and Worcester, Western Mass, right? Or somebody who sits down in the Federal Transportation Building in Washington, D.C., who's a bureaucrat who's accountable to nobody. I mean, I just know as Lieutenant Governor, some of the education that I had to engage with people of our own administration about parts of the state issues that were unique. And earmarks are that piece of leverage that a representative or a senator, if used appropriately, can say, okay, you're not listening, you're not being flexible, you're not trying to help us. I'm going to do it my way, or I'm going to carve this out. So I think it's a very important part of the legislative process about accountability, because you know what? The people in Fitchburg or Worcester don't elect that person. They elect, so I think it being out of the mix for as long as it has been has absolutely contributed to this dysfunction that we are seeing in Washington, D.C. And so I think these other programs are excellent, but we should also have the ability, and look, if our rep or senator is using earmarks for crazy things or something that's inappropriate or illegal, we can hold them accountable, him or her, at the next election. But if they're using them to advance the economic interest or educational interest of their region, they're doing their job. And so I just think it's an important distinction, and I'm sure Tricia could probably give a whole bunch of other examples where Congressman Olver used them in that regard.
I would just add, that was Don Olver's take, was that, not even in Boston, folks down in DC did not know what was best for his first congressional district. And being able to direct millions of dollars investment in a meaningful way was, he took it very seriously. And I think Massachusetts is doing better for it as well as his district, so thank you.
I think we're going to take one more question. So I know there are a couple of hands up.
Thank you, Rory. Hi, Tim. I'm the founding president of Narrow Metro Station Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. One of my board members in the back, too, Luis Torres, is also a broker. We have some concerns in our community, in our region, as this region is diversifying. How are any of your entities addressing the small business owners and also the developers that are interested, that are coming from our community, that want to be a part of this, and also the input from your local communities? What are some of the things that either you need or that you are hearing in terms of feedback, in terms of the needs as you're doing this research and needs assessment, depending on the town or city area?
Great question.
I guess the short answer, and I suspect it's going to be different for each of us, right? But my organization is public-private. So I have a board of 76 people, of which some people are in the crowd, Kelly, that represents municipal governments. So I have town planners, town administrators, members of Board of Selectmen, state legislators, economic development people, our regional transit authority, employers, environmentalists. They're all involved in our direct governance. So the advocacy positions we take are based on their input. And frankly, I could not have been doing this for the last 15 years if I was antagonizing key constituencies on some of these points.
So we also have a governance structure that makes sure that we're looking at these equity issues. At least a third of our members, third of our board has to be either low income or live in a low income neighborhood. And specifically for small businesses, we actually have a whole small business program. We partner with the chamber North Central Development Corporation, to help specifically low and moderate income business owners to create their own business. They come in, if they can't borrow from a regular lender, we can go to the chamber, which has a program to allow small business owners who don't quite meet the credit scores or their business doesn't meet the traditional lending standards. So for us, it's something that we take very seriously. And part of this work that we're doing, Tricia alluded to it at the beginning, is the Working Cities Challenge, is to make sure that we're not creating a neighborhood that's going to change who's living in the neighborhood, but to make the neighborhood better for the people who are there. And that means creating small businesses for people who are local. So we partnered with the university and their Idea Lab to bring those ideas of local entrepreneurs and help them make them a reality right here in the town where they work, which helps with transit, because then people are living and working in the same community. So for us, this is all, we feel like it's all part of one piece to make these neighborhoods great neighborhoods, so that people can live here for the people who are already in the neighborhoods, and not just, and making sure we're not gentrifying the neighborhoods and turning them over.
And I would just add to Mark's comment, the work that we've been doing in Fitchburg, both Mark and I represent nonprofit organizations. You know, I serve over 19,000 individuals, low-income individuals in our region, many of them minority individuals. So our voice is at the table with the city, as well as the residents and clients that we serve. So I think, at least here in Fitchburg, we've made the right step in that direction.
Yeah, and as a chamber, we have approximately 2,300 members with our partner affiliates. Most of them small businesses, probably 5 to 10 employees or less. But we're mindful of changing demographics in the state and certainly in the city, and have instituted a whole host of new programs that reach out to communities of color, immigrant communities, that try to engage, provide access, let people know the way the chamber can help. A lot of our programming and events have kind of changed in that regard. We established a diverse professionals roundtable, which provides some specific programming and kind of support and reference. So we've also diversified our board, our staff, in conversations with some of the ethnic media as well, and bilingual. So we've reached out in a whole bunch of different ways, and it's the right thing to do, but also candidly, it's, Roy will tell you as chamber members, it's in light of self-interest. We want to be able to make sure that as the population becomes more diverse and changes, people get involved in the chamber, support it, use it as a way to make their business more successful, personally, professionally, develop themselves, but also support the chambers and the missions that they've engaged in this country for a couple hundred years.
I have failed miserably in my role to keep us on time, so I apologize about that. But I want to thank everyone for the questions. We had some great questions. I know there's still some questions. It's the end of the formal panel presentation, but that isn't the end of the conversation. We'll have some networking afterwards, so I think all of our panelists are sticking around. And Tracy, do you have a...
Well, I'll thank our panelists here in a second, but I actually want to respond to your comment. I know that we talked earlier about the TDI program. They actually have a new program that's specifically designed for moving local developers. And so that is something that you'll be hearing more about probably in the upcoming months. So kind of keep your ears open for that. Yeah, and also as someone who was the vice chair of small business for the Greater Seattle Chamber and did a lot of work with developers as well as in other business sectors around clean energy, sustainable developments, et cetera. One of the key things that helped me build 2 businesses as well as has helped other business owners throughout the Pacific Northwest was mentorship. I still meet with my group of developers to go running on Saturday mornings whenever I go to Seattle. And it's all kind of sitting out, hanging out around the breakfast table, talking about, we would actually go to a different part of the city or actually the entire region and actually meet, go for a run, and then sit down and have breakfast just so we can kind of see what was going on and then kind of talk about what the opportunities were. And people actually did deals across the breakfast table. People actually invested in other people's businesses to help new, young, budding business owners and developers build their businesses. I highly encourage any of you, if there are any developers here, I know that I did meet with someone in Fall River who actually did his first deal, and it took, mentorship to do a $30 million project. It was his first project. And so, you know, those are the kinds of things that I think that really help to kind of encourage, like, keeping business local, doing development local, to make sure that transit-oriented development is actually more equitable. So, do you have any closing comments, Joel?
No, I just want to thank our distinguished panelists, and I'd like to ask for a round of applause.